Wow, what a week it's been. On Sunday, I know most of us weren't here on Sunday, but we had a great day in our religious school, learning in our sukkah. On Monday, of course, our 20 living hostages came home. We began to dance and to cry. On Tuesday, we started to realize our tears were from both joy and grief, as we started to grasp more fully that our deceased hostages are not all yet home. On Tuesday night and Wednesday, we danced with the Torah in our social hall in our sanctuary, 7 beautiful hakafot in the evening and again in the morning. And in the morning, we read the very end and the very beginning of our Sefer Torah. On Thursday, some of us attended the LA Remembers October 7th memorial event, so different from last year in so many ways. And on Friday, yesterday, Caesar brought in our bagels and our challah from Bagel Factory. God brought in the Shabbat bride, as God does every week. And here we are today. We're here reading Parashat Bereshit, the first parasha of the Torah. And amidst all that, even with the amazing parasha we have this week, I find myself drawn back to thinking about our holiday of Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah that we celebrated this week, starting Monday sundown, ending Wednesday sundown. It's the holiday when the war started and the holiday when our living hostages came home. It's a holiday that I have celebrated in Israel and, of course, outside Israel. And the two versions of celebration, to me, are so strikingly different. I continue to think about those differences and continue to try to understand them. Shmini Atzeret, mentioned in the Torah, is a fascinating and kind of mysterious holiday. And Simchat Torah, such a distinctive and important holiday in our Jewish experience, is not mentioned in the Torah and didn't even originate in Israel. There's a lot to think about there. So today we'll take a few minutes to learn together and explore these holidays of Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah, which we started talking about in the learning we did on our days of Yom Tov last week and earlier this week. And we'll conclude by talking about the special things we have to celebrate this year. So starting with Shmini Atzeret. Those of you who were here last week for the days of Yom Tov Sukkot might remember I was sharing some teaching from Rabbi Arthur Waskow, who wrote the book Seasons of Our Joy. This book is a teaching from him about the Jewish calendar, focusing on how it's both lunar and solar. Our months are lunar months, beginning with the new moon. The 15th day of each month is our full moon. And our year begins right around the fall equinox with our high holiday season. Rabbi Waskow explains that the holiday of Sukkot is the peak, the epitome, the best Jewish holiday, and that on that holiday, the moon cycle and the sun cycle overlap and converge. The details of that are fascinating, but a little beyond the scope of what we'll learn today. Now, on the holiday of Shmini Atzeret, coming at the end of Sukkot or after Sukkot, the moon cycle and the sun cycle, synchronized on Sukkot, begin to diverge. The way we see that visually, the way that we can notice that ourselves, is that on the holiday of Shmini Atzeret, which we celebrated earlier this week, both the light of the sun and the light of the moon begin to decrease. The days continue to shorten as the winter solstice approaches, and the moon wanes as the new moon approaches. Of course, the winter solstice is approaching more slowly and the new moon more quickly. With these different speeds, the cycles diverge. Now, a question that Rabbi Waskow doesn't really explore is Shmini Atzeret part of Sukkot or not? He just understands that it is not part of Sukkot. Based on my own learning and experience, I hold by this interpretation. The Torah says in Leviticus 23 and Deuteronomy 16 that Sukkot is 7 days long. In Leviticus 23, it adds that the first day is a Yom Tov, we should do no work, and it doesn't say this about the 7th day. Rabbi Waskow does get into the details here. He notes that there are 4 passages in which the Torah enumerates our festivals, in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. But in these 4 passages, Shmini Atzeret is only mentioned twice, in Leviticus and Numbers. Both times it's described as the 8th day, and stated it's a Yom Tov, we should do no work. So, on the one hand, Sukkot is 7 days, doesn't include Shmini Atzeret. But on the other hand, Shmini Atzeret is the 8th day. So the 8th day of what? We could say the 8th day of Sukkot, except that isn't what the Torah says, and the rabbinic discussion has proceeded from there throughout the generations. Okay, fine. So where did Simchat Torah come from? For those of you who were here earlier this week, you might remember my mentioning that even among all that was happening for the Jewish people this week, we rabbis on our email listservs were, of course, also discussing the origins of Simchat Torah. Verily, that conversation began before Yom Tov and continued after, as colleagues eagerly continued to share what they considered the best resources. Now, before we dive straight into the middle of that rabbinic conversation, let's step back for a moment and talk about Shmini Atzeret, Simchat Torah, in Israel compared to outside Israel. We know that inside Israel, the Yom Tov days on our festivals are 1 day, as specified in the Torah. Outside Israel, this is doubled to 2 days. An example of this is that many families in the diaspora outside Israel have 2 Passover Seders, the first night and the second night, and in the Israel, there's only 1 Seder. The reason for this custom, stated very briefly, is that our technology for making our calendar was not so precise in the ancient world, and we observed 2 days to account for this lack of precision and make sure we're observing the holiday on the correct day, a tradition that persists until today. Before I ever celebrated this holiday in Israel, before my rabbinic study led me into exploring all these details, it felt clear to me, Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah were 2 separate holidays. On Simchat Torah, you dance with the Torah, and before that, on Shmini Atzeret, we say Yizkor. When I celebrated Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah in Israel, almost 10 years ago now, I had a very different experience, and I'll admit, I felt disoriented and confused. So I went to shul on Simchat Torah night in Jerusalem, also known as Erev Shmini Atzeret, ready to dance with the Torah late into the night, as is the custom for young people in large Jewish communities in New York and Los Angeles. And I found in Jerusalem, even the latest celebrations were wrapping up by 10 p.m. Everyone seemed to be going home for Yom Tov dinner. I had never before associated a Yom Tov dinner at home with Simchat Torah evening. The next morning was almost as disorienting, as services in shul went from energy-filled hakafot to the quiet reflection and sadness of Yizkor. When the day ended, I felt like I had celebrated a holiday that was unique to Israel, that didn't and couldn't exist elsewhere. In time, I learned that the holiday of Simchat Torah, as we know it today, originated outside Israel, developed its present form over a number of centuries, and now is observed inside Israel combined with Shmini Atzeret as 1 day of Yom Tov. Outside Israel, of course, these 2 holidays seem like 2 separate holidays. Since our custom is to have 2 days of Yom Tov outside Israel, they naturally feel distinct from one another, even though they're technically the same. Simchat Torah is not mentioned anywhere in our Torah scroll. It originated with the Babylonian custom of reading the Torah from start to finish once a year, ending and restarting around the conclusion of Sukkot. In the 8th century in Babylonia, Northern Europe, and Eretz Yisrael, various customs began to emerge associated with the ending and beginning of the Torah reading cycle, including hakafot, which we now know as dancing with the Torah, and in general, celebration of the Torah by removing many Torah scrolls from the Ark all at the same time in an act of reverence and in celebration. At least in my experience, Simchat Torah has the same awe and reverence as Rosh Hashanah, channeled in a very different form, which is what makes the holiday so compelling. Our Torah, the very same Torah that compels us to stand silent and be awoken by shofar blasts, also compels us to dance for hours, sometimes powered by a l'chaim or 2. Simchat Torah in the diaspora is an ecstatic release of all the spiritual static we've built up during our Sukkot celebration, of course, right after our high holidays. Shmini Atzeret, our day for saying Yizkor, is separate. In Israel, this isn't the case. We intersperse ecstatic release with quiet reflection. It's a very different experience. Every year since I celebrated Simchat Torah in Israel, I've thought about Israel in a special way as I celebrate Simchat Torah outside Eretz HaKodesh, outside our Holy Land. And of course, this year, we've all held Israel in our minds, hearts, and souls in a way we have never done before, because this year was unlike any year we've had before. I don't know about you, but for me, as I danced with the Torah this year, I was transported back to Simchat Torah 2 years ago, when we danced our hakafot in shock, in confusion, in disbelief, in sadness, and in anger. And 1 year ago, I don't know about you, but I'm not sure I can even remember last year's Simchat Torah. It's as if my emotions made those memories blurry, knowing I wouldn't be able to bear their recollection. This year, we danced with joy and with grief. Joy because our 20 hostages are alive and home, and grief because some of our hostages came home but are no longer alive. And further grief as we learned more and more about the bodies of our hostages that are not yet home, even some emotional conflict as we tried to figure out how we ourselves were feeling and started to realize that not all of us experience the exact same emotions at the exact same times. And perhaps for some of us, certainly for me, the grief shifts and settles as we realize the situation is better, thank God, but it isn't really over. This is the season we now find ourselves in. This is the season we will continue to experience and navigate together. But before we end our learning together today, we must take a moment for celebration. Not only are we celebrating the return of our hostages, we are also celebrating the end and beginning of our Torah. For those who were not here earlier this week for Simchat Torah Day, I want to make sure you know the final Aliyah of our Torah, immediately followed by the first Aliyah of our Torah, were moments of great celebration. When people are called to the Torah for these Aliyot, it is a moment of special honor. So we call to the Torah for the final Aliyah, Mitchell Gossett. This honor is called Chatan Torah. We honored Mitchell for restarting Men's Club, for engaging and mobilizing this demographic of our community towards togetherness and mitzvot and learning, and for reaching back into Adat Shalom history, bringing the best of our past into our present and ahead into our future. This Aliyah was read by Daphne Sizomu, one of our Chaim Saba Torah readers. And then we call to the Torah for the first Aliyah, Daphne Sizomu. This honor is called Kalat Bereshit. We honor Daphne for her Torah reading, of course, but also for connecting our community with her family and her community in Uganda. Rabbi Artson was here last month as our scholar in residence, and he remembered and shared with us that Daphne actually grew up in Los Angeles when her father was here studying to be a rabbi, and now Daphne is back in Los Angeles with her own family as her husband is studying to be a rabbi. And Daphne is here at Adat Shalom doing this amazing mitzvah of Torah reading for our community while raising her own family. This Aliyah was read by Jonathan Marcus, who read Torah and Haftarah so beautifully today. All in all, we look to this year ahead and we can't help but see some things that are daunting and challenging. But here today in this moment, we have so much to be joyful for. We have so much to celebrate. May we be blessed to take the celebration and joy of Simchat Torah into the week ahead and into the year ahead. Shabbat Shalom.